Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's MSP Minds Live, how to say it right so clients listen. We have an amazing panel with me today. I'm going to jump in to let everyone introduce themselves. I will say it's a very English panel. I hope you all enjoy, and let's get started. So with us today is Richard Tubb. Richard, how are you feeling?
All the better for seeing you, Yasmin, today. And I've just been in the Zoom chat, chatting to people from Bermuda, from all over the world, from Texas, everywhere. It's brilliant to see such a global audience.
I saw we've got some exotic locations there. It's really nice. And I know you're very jealous about the weather.
Yeah, we've got people in Mauritius, Bermuda. I suspect it's a lot warmer there than it is here in Newcastle upon Tyne in England.
Probably is. So Richard has been working with us at Atera for quite a while now. He's an IT business growth expert. We've done some joint collaborations in the past, and you're very active in our community too, which is wonderful to see. So thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
And I'm going to jump over to you, Roger. How are you doing?
Hi, Jasmine. I'm doing well, thank you very much. Not quite as sunny here in Edinburgh today as it is down in Newcastle. Extremely windy, actually. I've had to close the window just in case you can hear it battering against the side of the house. But yeah, looking forward to this today, and welcome to everybody from across the world.
Thanks, Roger. It's lovely to have you here. Roger's a marketing consultant and speaker. He's actually recently written a book, which we will get to later. That's a little teaser for now. And last but not least, Craig Sharp, CEO of Abusi. Craig, how are you? And you're back by popular demand, of course.
Well, I shall try to hide my embarrassment at that thought, but no, I'm really good, thank you. Just to enter the British conversation about weather, we had half an inch of hail yesterday. Normally one talks about snow, but we had half an inch of hail. It was that thick. It gathered on the patio. So look, other than that, brilliant. Really looking forward to today's event, and thank you for the invite.
Perfect. Yeah, I think it's a real English thing to talk about the weather. So I'm glad everyone knows what the weather's like everywhere. I'm located in Tel Aviv here. It's really hot and sunny, and the beach is lovely. But I hope you might be able to come and join us soon. And myself, I'm Yasmin. I'm a technical CSM here at Atera. Been here for the past year and been having a blast. So shall we get started? Hey, so as I mentioned, we've got an amazing session today. Thank you everyone for joining us on the line from everywhere around the world. What we're going to be talking about today is from prospect to customer, how to sell through education, overcoming obstacles and closing the deal, how to deepen your relationship with existing clients and customers, how to build real loyalty, leverage automation, and prove your worth through proactivity. Upselling your services to add revenue, helping clients understand your value, and building a trust-based relationship. And of course, we'll have a live Q&A session at the end. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please submit them in the Q&A section, and I promise we will get to them later. So just before we get started, I'd love to just have a quick poll to see kind of how you guys are all feeling. What's the biggest struggle when you're talking to clients or prospects? We can just launch the poll now. Thank you. So if you could just take a moment there to answer the question, what is your biggest struggle when talking to clients and prospects? Is it explaining something technical to a non-techie client? How to sell your services and upsell? How to help prospects or clients see the value of your work, managing customer objections or pushbacks, or anything else, please let us know. I actually can't see the results yet. So Julie, if you wouldn't mind sharing them once we close the poll, just so we can all see how our listeners today are feeling and what they struggle with. Great. Thank you. Okay, so we've got a winner there. How to show prospects or clients the value of their work. Very interesting. So we're going to touch upon that today. So that's great, and it's great that you joined us. Okay, so jumping into our first topic, how to start your sales pitch with a bang. Roger, I know that you've done a lot in this area, and you've also kind of written about this, how to market, how to talk to customers. I'd love to hear your take on this.
Well, first of all, I just love this slide, starting your sales pitch with a bang. And I think that one of the things that people expect is that that's exactly how you should start a sales pitch. So you might go in with some startling statistic or, a powerful example of a client story or something like that. Or you may focus in on a big problem and how you solve it. And that's the traditional method of starting with a big bang. But we thought we'd do something a little bit different today, a sort of different sort of bang. And one of the things that I find when I work with companies from all sorts of industries, not just MSPs, is that we tend to make a couple of mistakes when we go into the sales pitch. And the first mistake we often make is that we make it about the features of our product or the features of our service, almost to the exclusion of everything else, all sometimes without even knowing what the actual problem is that we're there to solve. And the second problem is that we often go in with a torrent of complicated language from our industry, in this case MSPs, as opposed to the language of the people that we're talking to, the language of our clients. And it's that combination of the focus on features and sometimes the focus on complicated language. Instead of engaging those clients, it can actually put them off. So what we're suggesting today is a different sort of bang. And that's to start your sales pitch with some questions and some listening. And I know that Craig feels very strongly about listening.
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Roger. I think what Roger said is a really good starting point, because actually what he said quite early on was everyone is expecting the bang. You're expecting because you think that's how it should be done. The client is expecting it because that's how it's been done to them every time. My approach is slightly different, in which I go in and I ask some questions, which Richard's got some excellent insight into that. He's going to follow me about the questions that he would recommend. But for me, it's about listening. That first engagement, in my opinion, shouldn't be the hard sell. The first engagement should be, why am I here? What sort of issues can I help you with? Listen. Let the customer explain to you the problem that has led them to get you to sit there at that time. And more importantly, to Roger's original point about it's what everyone expects, is you probably won't be the only person that's talking to that client that day. There's probably 3 or 4 other people coming in, and everyone talks about trying to be different and memorable. Well, if you go in and listen and don't try to sell hard and don't try to follow a prearranged expected script, then you will stand out that day. But in order to get the right answers out of the client, you have to ask the right questions. And Richard, I know you've got some excellent questions, I think 4, which you can very easily outline to people to get the right answers.
Yeah, happy to share. And I should say, Yasmin, for the benefit of people who don't know mine and Craig's relationship, and Roger and I and me and Craig, we're all friends now, but Craig and I used to be competitors in the Birmingham area in the UK. So I used to run a managed service provider business, and Craig was somebody I used to come up against. So if there's one thing you take away from today's webinar, it's this: when Craig talks, listen, because he knows what he's talking about, and he's beaten me to the punch on loads of business. But the thing I would say about this, I mean, I'm looking at the attendee list today, and we've got, MSPs from all over the world. So the one thing that I realized when I was an MSP is, I got into this industry because I like helping people. but I'm a techie geek. I love technology. I love talking technology. I love fixing technology. Unfortunately, clients don't feel that same way about technology. As Craig said, they're not really interested in, as Roger said, they're not interested in features and benefits. They're interested in how you can help them. So I learned really early on to follow Craig's advice and to listen more than I talked. And for somebody like me, you can imagine that's a real challenge. But so I came up with 4 questions that I asked during a sales situation. And I asked these questions and I kept quiet and I let the prospect talk to me. So feel free to grab a pen and paper and write these ones down. But the first question that I asked the prospect was, what do you think that the problem is? Now, this sounds obvious, doesn't it? Because most of us, Yasmin, you know, especially in the techie industry, we sit in front of somebody and we think that they're expecting us to solve the problem. But often we make assumptions about what the problem is. So they tell us, you know, we ask, what is the problem? What do you think the problem is? And they tell us. And then what I ask them is, how is this affecting you? So they will then say, oh, well, it's costing us time, it's costing us money, or it's an absolute pain in the backside and it affects me personally. Or now on the poll earlier on that Yasmin run, it said the biggest challenge that everybody on this webinar is having, or the majority of people are having, is convincing people of your value as an MSP. And I think that comes down to the fact that most of us try to convince people of our value. What about if you let the prospect tell you how they see you wanting to fix the problem, the value they expect you to bring? So that's the second question I ask. How is this affecting you? And I let them talk. Again, keep quiet and let them talk. The third question that I would ask in the situation is, what have you already tried to do to fix this? Now, this is a powerful question to ask because, you know, at this point in the sales conversation, I'm normally itching to jump in and be the hero and to help them with all, you know, the solution to the problem. But how many of us on the call today have been in a situation and we suspect that they might have tried to do something already to fix the problem, but they're not altogether sure about it? So, you know, it could be the boss's nephew has jumped in and tried to do some fixing or something along those lines. So asking them what they've tried to do to fix it already is really, really powerful. And the fourth one, really, really simple question is, okay, thanks for sharing all that. How do you see us helping you? And keeping quiet from that point on and letting them explain to you why they want to work with you. So I don't know if that makes sense, Yasmin, but, you know, hopefully a lot of people watching this are techie geeks like me, been in that sales situation, and they feel as though they've got to persuade somebody to work with them. What I found is by asking those 4 questions, keeping my mouth zipped, keeping my ears open, as Craig said, ended up with a lot more business.
And one of the things that we've got to be very, very careful with, if we're going to do this different approach, is to actually listen to the answers. And what I mean by listen is to hear what they're actually saying. And this is difficult because even in the scenario that Richard describes, where you've got those 4 questions that you want to ask, once you've asked the first question, your mind will then be saying, I'm going to ask the second question next. But you've got to stop and absolutely hear what the client is telling you in their answer, because not only will you get to the root of the problem, but you'll also hear them talk it to you in their own language. And that helps us solve the second problem that I mentioned earlier about talking in language that the client doesn't understand. What better way to understand what they're going through to actually hear them articulate it to you in their own language?
100%. I think those are great questions and they could be a great base to start the communication with any potential client or anyone you want to go into business with. And it's also a chance for you to kind of get to know who you will be working with, if it's a good fit for you, if this is a business that you want to take on. And to the point of the poll earlier, is that you won't necessarily have to prove your value, but they'll bring the problem or what they want you to do. And then you can just say, okay, I can do that. And then eventually, this is how I can do that. This is how I can solve the problem. This is how I can address your pain points. And I think those questions can be great for any, I don't know, profession you'd like to take on in the future, if it might be therapy. I think those could also be great questions you could use there too. Perfect. So I'm just, for the sake of time, going to move over to our next slide to talk about some common sales obstacles and how to overcome them. So once we've listened, we've heard what they're looking for, what their pain points are, how do we then offer our services and overcome any obstacles or any pushbacks or anything that might cause some friction in that process? Richard, I'd love to hear what you think here.
Sure. So going back to the 4 questions that I ask, it'll become really, really clear why I ask those questions, because, you know, for most of us who have been in that sales situation, one of the sales objections that we'll come across is, well, thanks for that. Thanks for putting the solution in front of me, but we can get the same thing cheaper. And you go, okay, and then it becomes a race to the bottom, doesn't it? And, you know, trying to outdo whatever the cheapest bid that has come along there. In the questions that I asked earlier, I said, well, how is that affecting you? The client has volunteered to us, oh, this is the impact that it's having on me personally. This is the impact that it's having on the business. So they've probably told you this is what it's costing and so on and so forth. So when the client comes back and says, oh, we can get the same thing cheaper, at this point, I used to say, oh, right, you should absolutely do that. It sounds as though you've got that situation sorted. I'll leave you to it then. and they go, well, no, we're not, you know. And so basically it was a really quick way of us getting out of this whole thing of, oh yeah, we can get the same thing cheaper elsewhere. The other one that I want to throw out, Yasmin, that I think is going to be really common for people watching the webinar, I certainly experience this as an MSP a lot, is when it gets to the end of the conversation, they say, that all sounds great. Can you put that in a proposal for us? And so you put a proposal together and you email it across to them and you hear nothing. And it goes quiet and you try to get in touch with them and you hear nothing. And they totally ghost you. They totally disappear. And so what happened for me when they says, oh, can you put that in a proposal? What I was hearing was that this is either a no and they don't know how to tell me, or they've got more questions. So I used to say, oh, it sounds as though you might have some other questions. Can we delve into them? And I would pretty much avoid putting proposals in front of people, because for me, you know, I just don't want to spend the time putting effort into proposals that's not going to land business. So those are the things, those are the ways that I avoided those type of objections. And Craig, I know I said earlier that we used to be competitors. You must have come across that situation quite often where one of the clients that we were speaking to probably asked me for a proposal and I wouldn't give it, and then came and asked you for a proposal as well.
Well, look, the glib answer to that is some of your proposals have probably been given to me as a pick list to provide a service and vice versa. And that's kind of what happens. It's the sort of thing that MSPs need to be aware of, because all of that time that you invest investigating, asking the right questions, talking to the client, finding out what the issues are, and then writing a detailed proposal is often a substitute for them writing a requirements list to put out to tender. And you therefore then find that if you're first in the door, you are the one that has decided what needs to be done. You've used all of your expertise, and then all of the other MSP opportunity seekers who come along after you are merely following the same script. And as you say, it becomes a race to the bottom in terms of price. I think the other thing to subvert the question slightly about common sales obstacles and how to overcome them is that, to a degree, this is also the client selling themselves to you. It's really important to see this process that you're going through early on as a two-way street. I have a belief, and one that I stick to, that not every single piece of business that presents itself at my front door is one that we need to pursue. And so actually that initial conversation around sales, in inverted commas, is an opportunity for you to find out, well, does this client have the right sort of objective perhaps that I'm seeking to fulfill? Are we on the right wavelength? Do they value the service that I'm offering, which was one of the big outcomes of the poll earlier? And you have to then ask some difficult questions when they start to object about, well, are they the right kind of person for me? Are they the right kind of client for our organization? So, you know, yes, there will be objectives, objections, and they will probably be around price. They might be around service, but they're probably going to be around price. You have to do a bit of due diligence early on to make sure that you have clearly identified where your price points are and which you cannot drop below, so that you can have an honest reply to the client and say, I just can't do it for that price. It's not cost effective. And then you have to get to a point where you go, okay, if this is something that I want to pursue, the price is right and the customer's good fit for us, then you can move forward. And like Richard says, I wouldn't write a proposal. I give them figures on the day, and I see the whites of their eyes, and you know whether you've got an opportunity to move it forward. You never see the whites of a client's eyes when they're reading the proposal, because you'll have sent it a few days after you saw them. If you tell them it'll cost them $1,500 a month and they metaphorically fall off their chair, you know they're not for you. If they don't even flinch when you tell them the price, it's probably quite a good way of moving forward. So that's,
I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of questions both ways, should we? I mean, Rich has explained how we can ask questions to get to the root of the client's problems, but any objections that usually arise from the client's perspective come from questions that we haven't answered in our reply. And I think that this method of finding out the information so that we can then articulate our offer to them and answer any questions that they may have, hopefully by the end of the questions, there won't be any more questions that need to be asked. And by that stage, if that's the case, then it should be a simple decision as to whether to go ahead or not.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for sharing your stories. I can see in the chat people also kind of feeling it too. I can see John wrote that he always asks, is the juice worth the squeeze? Not all potential clients are good clients to win over. Yeah, John, thank you for that. And Sheila also posted an interesting question. Down the road, how will you know our work together is effective? That's a big one.
Yeah.
That's a big one. So yeah, I mean, there are things that can arise, things that can come up, but as we mentioned, it's two ways. You need to decide that it's good for you, and the customer or the prospect also needs to feel if that's a good match. So after we've just covered some of these obstacles, how do we close the deal? Roger, what would your advice be here?
I think that if we've answered all of the questions, and yes, price might become part of that, then closing the deal should be just as simple of actually just saying, have you got any more questions before we can move ahead to putting ink on paper? Or do we put ink on paper anymore, or do we actually type it onto screens? And it's that's why it's so important to make sure that all the questions are answered in that sales process. And I think that, again, it's very important to try to keep it simple, to keep the language that you use in those conversations in as simple as it can be for that client to understand, because they may not be exactly the same industry as you. You could be a managed service provider for an accountant, or a managed service provider for a motor mechanic, or a managed service provider for a school. And each of those companies will have a different way of talking. And a lot of the objections, again, come from misunderstandings in what we're talking about. So my absolute key to getting all of these questions answered and keeping it simple is to reduce it to the simplest level for both sides. So try not to use the jargon of the MSP industry. Try to understand how you can explain what you do, the problems that you solve in your terms, as simply as you can put it across to them. And if there are no objections, then I think the deal is pretty much almost closed. Unless they genuinely are looking for an excuse to get out of the conversation. But if you've gone through the question and answer situation, kept it simple, then I think you're probably there.
Hopefully. Fingers crossed. Craig, a little bit about your experience closing deals with new customers.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that's really important to state early on is that I don't have a process that involves a singular meeting and a decision at the end of that singular first engagement with the prospect. So this is more of a flow, and I would say I would probably go and have a conversation at least 3 times with the prospect before there would be what I would determine to be a sealed deal at the end of it. And therefore, my technique, and one that I found that works over time, is if you go with an objective that at the end of your 45-minute meeting with the prospect, you've got to come out with a deal. That's quite a hurdle for the prospect to overcome. They're starting here, and in 45 minutes, you want them to get to here. That's quite a leap. So my approach is incremental movement forward. You're not asking them to do an enormous decision in one go. What you're doing is you're saying, well, okay, we've had a conversation. The prices seemed okay. Shall we move to the next level? The next level is a bit more of a fundamental assessment of what you've got. We send someone in. We do what you might see as a health check of IT, but what we see as a due diligence around what you've got. Verify what you've told us is actually here. Find all the little horrible things that if we become your IT provider, we're going to find too late, arguably. Then we move on to the next level, and so on and so forth. So what you're doing is you're not asking the client to go from 0 to 100 in 45 minutes. What you're doing over a process of maybe a couple of weeks is saying, well, we go from 0 to 30 and 30 to 50 and 50 to 70. And then eventually that final, yes, I'd like to move forward with you, is actually quite, as Roger says, quite a sort of relatively straightforward decision to make, really. So that would be my approach to closing.
Yeah, I mean, that's also interesting. I'm guessing there's probably different approaches, different people. Some do want to, go in, have one session, kind of, sign the contract, move on. And some take the time to do a proper assessment of the network. It kind of probably depends who the person in front of you is, what kind of business you're currently running, and what your end goal is. But I think it's another interesting way to kind of manage that process. And even if the people on the line are not ready to do that quite yet, that's also okay, but it's something to keep in mind to maybe do in the future. So I like that. Thank you, Craig. And Richard, as Craig's competitor in the past, did you also have all these sessions with customers, with prospects?
Yeah, and I should say, Craig and I, as you can tell, are good friends. So we were friendly competitors. We weren't at each other's throats in the situation there. I definitely subscribe to Craig's theory about like sort of slow and steady, let the relationship build. I think there's a tendency, and again, I'll say I was a massive, when I ran my MSP business, massive geek. Sales wasn't something that came naturally to me. So when we got to that, almost near that finish line, there was a tendency, Yasmin, for me to want to go, right, let's just get this closed and let's sprint ahead. What I learned, though, was, again, to ask some other questions and to listen, because quite often it would uncover whether there's anything that's going to sort of snatch away the victory, from actually getting the business in place there. So one of the questions that I used to ask people was, do you see anything getting in the way of us proceeding? Now, this sounds obvious, doesn't it? But in other words, you're saying, is there anything that I forgot to ask you? Is there anything else? Because we've all heard about buyer's remorse. That's when you agree to buy something, and then maybe on the evening or the following day or a week later, you're like, oh, I wish I hadn't spent all the money on that. So, you can often uncover buyer's remorse in advance if you say to them, look, do you see anything getting in the way of proceeding? Because they're either going to go, right, no, we're all set, let's go for it. Or they're going to say, actually, I've got another question. So that was a really powerful one. And the other thing that I learned to ask was, quite often I'd be in a sales situation with somebody who ultimately wasn't the person who was going to sign the check off. Check, I'm showing my age here, who was going to click on the electronic signature. So I used to ask, is there anybody else that needs to be involved in this decision? Now, for those of you who are working with non-profits, with charities, you will be used to the fact that nearly all, in all cases, even the managing director or the CEO of a charity needs to go away and consult with the board or the trustees to actually get sign off on things. But if you're speaking to small businesses, you might think you're speaking to the decision maker, but there might be a partner involved. There might be somebody else involved in getting that deal signed off. So I asked, is there any other people that you might need to get involved in this decision? So that's the second question. And the third one, and I want to throw this out there. So Craig and I have laughed here about, we used to be competitors and stuff. We never came across a situation where I was stealing a client off Craig, or Craig was stealing a client off me because we did the job well. But there's going to be lots of people on the call today who have got that awkward situation, awkward for somebody, when you're speaking to a client and they say, oh, we're going to sack our existing provider and come and work with you. And so that, they tell you why they want to work with you. I used to ask them the question, how are you going to handle the conversation with your existing IT provider? And I did that because on more than one occasion, I can think of two off the top of my head, they told me everything they hated about the existing MSP or the existing IT provider. They asked us to help them. They said, we're definitely going to move. And then when it came to them having the conversation and sacking the existing IT provider, as we would say in the UK, they bottled it. They completely chickened out of the situation and they carried on with the pain of working with their existing provider rather than have that awkward conversation. So I used to say, how are you going to handle this discussion with the existing provider? And that would put the question into their mind. And you could see if they were fearful at that point, we might coach them a little bit on how to have that conversation. But that was super important because, again, Yasmin, when I'm in that situation, I want to go away knowing I've won the business, not that I'm kidding myself that I've won the business, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's also a small industry. You might know that other company, the other MSP, might be a competitor of yours. And you can see, like, you had a friendly competition with Craig and you turned out to be good friends. And I think that's really important. So I think that question is very good, and it's not necessarily something we thought about. So thank you for sharing that. And jumping onto the onboarding process here, Richard, if you want to continue sharing how you would onboard a new customer once they've sealed the deal, after quite a bit of time and resources, we got there and he moved on from the other provider onto you. How would you do this in the best way? What are your next steps?
So everybody will have already gathered. You already knew this, Yasmin, because you know me, but I love to talk. I love to give advice, but we've already established, and Roger and Craig have given the advice that, sales situations is more about listening than talking. But when the deal is signed, this is the moment when you can take over and be the expert, give the advice and do more talking, because this is the point. They're all excited. The prospect is all excited about doing business, and they want guidance from you on what's going to happen next. So I really, truly believe that we need to have a strong process in place here. And we say, okay, what's going to happen next is you've signed the contract and we're going to come in and we're going to do A, B, and C. And when C's finished, we're going to do D and move them through. So almost give them a timeline of what we're going to go through. And I think, I'll again call on Craig here, because I think Craig does this incredibly well with his clients when he works with them. So Craig, what does your onboarding process look like?
I think the key thing for me is that the onboarding process is meshed with the sales process. And one of the things that I think is really important is to not see them as separate. Too many of us will have been either party to, involved with, aware of situations where a sales team has just presented, here we go, signed client, there you go, you just do what you need to do. And there's no knowledge, there's no understanding, there's no awareness. That's just dumped on someone's, usually IT technician's desk, and you're expected to move forward. So the process for me is that there's a sales element at the beginning. The middle bit is combination sales with technical awareness. Maybe a technician would be involved in that sort of health check pre-onboarding process. And then it transitions into a technical solution for actual onboarding. Fulfills two things really. Firstly, the IT team that will look after that client long term is not going to find out there's some dark hidden problem that they weren't aware of. And it shows the client that you've got a joined up process and you're not just being moved from department to department. So there's an awareness that you're running an efficient organization. And I just think it works. And it does give you that opportunity in that middle stage to even amend the prospect's quote based on what you find, because again, a lot of quotes are based on what you're told, not what you've seen yourself. And so there is that opportunity in the middle, if you combine the process, to say, well, we found all this stuff that's horrendously out of date or needs to be replaced or is legacy that wasn't taken into account in the sales process. So you're going to own that client maybe for 5 years. You want to make sure that what you're proposing against is accurate before you start.
Right. So from here, I just want to quickly jump on to showing your value with automation and proactivity, because this is something that came up in the poll. Looks like the majority of our listeners are dealing with in their work with their customers. And I think that a lot of the time, especially in our field in IT, a lot of the work is done kind of behind the scenes. So you've got, your tickets or your requests from the users, the customers, whoever, but then you've also got your retainer contracts or the proactive measures that you take, like patching the network, installing software, bringing onboarding new employees or new computers onto the network, maintenance or maintaining all your servers. And a lot of that is kind of, not on demand. It's something that you do on a regular basis. And I think maybe some customers might not be aware of that, and that could be harmful to you and to your business. And I think if a customer comes to you and asks, what are you doing? Or can you show me a report of what you've done in the past month or year or whatever? You're kind of in a bad place there if you've got to that point. So Craig, I'd love to hear what your tips and pointers are about how to show your customers on a regular basis what you're doing, how to give them the reports or, have meetings with them. What would you do?
I think you've got to engage with the client very regularly. Now, we're having people watching and listening to this all over the world, and maybe this doesn't work in places where the geography is big, but in the UK and for my particular company, I go and visit clients regularly, sometimes with appointments, sometimes I just pop in and say hello because I genuinely was passing by. And those kind of engagements are really valuable, because if they let you in and you can have a few moments with somebody in an ad hoc manner, you can really have that sort of relationship building side of things. And that feeds into the issue of automation. If you buy a telephone service, the absolute minimum that you expect is that you can make, you can receive, and you can transfer calls with your phone system. That's pretty much what you're paying for. Clients will go, well, I'm engaging with these IT people, so I expect it to work, to turn on in the morning and to not get infected with malware. Pick your three, but that's pretty much what people are expecting. So to constantly try and say, look how brilliant we are because we've done the thing you expected us to do anyway, I don't really think that works. So you can send them all the reports that you want, and I think the first couple of months they'll be really amazed by that, and after 6 months they won't read them. So you've got to just try to use automation to your advantage. And the way I see it is automation should get rid of as much of the basic stuff that you need to do for a client as possible to free up time to do greater value activity. And by greater value activity, I mean, talk to the client about whether there are some add-on services you can provide, find out if they need some training, talk to them about related services. We have a great selection of opportunities where we talk to our existing clients about cloud telephony services and we stick the two together. So automation for me shouldn't be the thing that you do, because that's the thing the customer expects. What you should be doing is utilizing the automation process to free up time to have a better conversation with higher value activity.
Yeah, and potentially take on new customers by freeing up that time. Richard's given a bit of a spoiler in the chat that you like to bring cakes to your customers, and I can see that Scott also pops in with cookies or biscuits, as we'd say. Do you want to tell us the story about the cake?
Yeah, I mean, I just try to do something that is a bit different to other people and show that you care. So, three things. We have in the past sent cupcakes to people with our logo in sugar paper on the top. That's lovely. For no reason, just, you know, randomly pick a customer out of the hat and go, right, you'll get some cakes this month. Brilliant. Second one is, sadly, because I've run a business for 25 years, there have been situations where people in the businesses that we look after have passed away, and we will always send a floral tribute the next day, because again, that just demonstrates that we're thinking about them. But ultimately, you just want to do small things that people remember. The final thing that I've done every year, personally, myself, is in December, I make a visit to every single client that's conceivably possible to do so. And I take a selection of confectionery or cookies for the staff and some personalized, maybe wine or similar gifts for the directors, and I hand deliver them. It's not the value of the gift that's important, but in December, I look every key principle in the eye. I shake them, or used to shake them by the hand, and thank them for their business. And I've hand delivered it. And I just think that goes a long way.
Yeah, I completely agree, Craig. And Richard, if you could touch a few moments about how to show your value with customers and maintaining the good relationship with your existing customers.
Love to, because, you know, and I can see the audience here, we've got a mixture of people who are doing break fix, who are doing managed services, want to be managed service providers. Whatever stage in the journey you're on, I can tell you from experience, we're talking about the sales situation now. When the prospect first comes to you, they are feeling pain and they want you to solve the pain, and you're going to solve the pain for them, and you're going to do a really good job of it. But what's going to happen after prospects have got a really, really short memory. So after about 6 months of you doing brilliant work and getting rid of all the pain for them, they're not going to feel any pain. And they're going to say to you the dreaded question that many of you might be familiar with: what is it we're paying you for? Because we haven't got any IT problems. And you're like, oh, yeah, you haven't got any IT problems because we're doing a really good job with automation and everything else. So what I used to do, Yasmin, was actually show people the problems as they're happening. So a really good example is the daily report that we would send out to clients. We wouldn't send it out after we'd solved the problems. We would send it out before we've solved the problems. And then the client would phone us and they'd say, hey, the backups failed today. Oh, thanks for telling us about that. Yeah, we spotted that at 8 o'clock this morning and we fixed that for you. No worries. So we demonstrated to them two things. One, problems are still going to occur, and that's what you're paying us for. And secondly, we've got your back. So eventually they're going to be like, yeah, we can see the problems are happening, but we know that Richard and the team's got our back and fixing it. So I hope that makes sense, Yasmin, but it's super important to let people know the problems that are happening and what you're doing to fix them.
Yeah, 100%. All right, so I'm just going to quickly skip the next slide, I think, because we kind of spoke about how to keep your relationship with your customers. And as Craig mentioned, he does buy cakes. And a fun fact that I figured out when we last spoke is that all of us on the line were born in September. And Craig, I also really like cakes. And I think you've got quite a few people here that would like to get a birthday gift very soon. So I'm going to jump on to how to upsell your services to that point that, you know, start thinking of all our birthday presents from now.
Yeah. Well, look, firstly, I'll make sure that when September comes around, and look, this fresh, boyish face that you see today has to admit to you that I will be 50 this September. So that's a lot of very special cake that needs to be provided to all. Look, upselling is a. I think once you've got the customer and you're providing really good IT service, it's much more straightforward to then offer related services. I don't think that it's important to necessarily try and have the widest possible spread of services, because I think you can be a little bit too thin on that. But we have a great deal of success in providing telephony services, and particularly now we do Microsoft Teams phone services. The two things are just inextricably linked. The client doesn't really understand the difference. And to be honest, there's a lot of telephony companies that are starting to get IT support questions, and IT companies that are getting telephony questions, because effectively it's all about firewalls and quality of service issues which customers don't really understand. They just want it fixed. So if you can do all of it, it's better than you trying to have a fight with a local telephony company. So I think upselling services is important. For me, the obvious one is you draw a matrix of all your customers, you draw a matrix of all your services across the top, you put a ticker across in which ones they've got or they've not got, and you go and target the people who haven't got certain services that you provide. So that's a pretty straightforward and sort of down and dirty way of doing it. But, you know, if you offer 10 services and most clients are only taking 5, there's 5 services you can provide to potentially all of your customers. There's a routine you can go through to just raise that to them and then see if they'd like to have a further conversation about it.
Perfect. Thank you. Oh, Roger, I think you're saying something, but you're on mute.
Sorry, yes. One thing that I also think is important, we talked before about relationships, and the ongoing relationship is so important. And yes, I'm all for buying cakes, Jaffa cakes, please. We also said at the start that we aren't going to go in with this gigantic, great big bang that people expect. We're going to actually sit and we're going to listen to questions. So we created that expectation that this is a different sort of relationship. And I do think that there is a suspicion from some people that the only point of buying the cakes and the only point of the ongoing meetings, however often they are, monthly, quarterly, is just so that you've got an opportunity to sell the next thing. So I think it is important to continue with that approach where you listen and then you offer to upsell features and benefits that can actually solve the problems that naturally develop out of the conversations that you're having on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, Richard, I remember you also mentioned some examples when we last spoke on how you would offer new services.
Yeah, so look, here's the bottom line for everybody who's in the managed service business or getting into managed services. Managed services is about lowering your cost of support and increasing your revenue. Managed services, as we've already discussed, is not about persuading people to buy things that they don't want. It's about helping people. So what I did as a managed service provider is we had a look at where our clients were feeling pain and we offered them a solution to it. Simple as that. So I'd say for everybody on the line today, look to be adding between 3 and 5 services to your portfolio that can help lower your cost of support, increase your revenue. Yasmin, I'll give a really, really quick example here. For those we've got an all British panel today. For those of us in the UK who are joining, the broadband can be pretty bad. And so everybody who's an MSP and, they're getting phone calls from their clients saying the broadband's gone down or Office 365 is not working or Google Workspace is not working, whatever, the broadband's rubbish. You have to deal with that ticket. You have to go and check the router and all the other stuff. What we did in that situation was we highlighted all the times the client had a problem with the broadband. And we said, we think you would be better off with this business grade broadband that we recommend. We would sell that solution into them. We would lower our cost of support because we'd get less support tickets on the broadband issue. We would increase our revenue and the client would be happier. Happy days for everybody concerned. Managed services is a win-win situation for the client and for the MSP if done right. So just look for problems, offer solutions, and away you go.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you all. I mean, time has flown by so quickly. I didn't even realize. So before we jump into the live Q&A, if anyone has any questions, you can start submitting your questions there and we'll get to them in just a moment. Just want to quickly bring up a few additional resources that you can all use to kind of, gain a bit more experience and more knowledge about what we've been talking about today. So Roger, you recently wrote a book that's called Cats, Mats and Marketing Plans. Yes. So just a quick surprise for everyone. We are doing a book giveaway. So the first 20 people that are going to write in the chat that they are IT geeks will get an ebook of Roger's book. So go ahead, show us all your geeky jokes that you're all IT geeks. Yes, they're coming in. Nicholas, Gary, David, Robert. Yes. Okay. I think we've got 20 now. So thank you everyone for submitting that. And you can also find Roger's book on Amazon, right?
Yep. Somebody was an IT geek plus there as well. I saw as the thing was going up and down.
There's a lot of geekiness going on, isn't there, Rob?
Yeah, and Robert prefers geek to nerd. So I'm glad I got you there. Richard, you've also got your blog to blog. So that's another resource they can use. And we've also got the Atera's blog that we keep posting some content there, so you can catch that out. This webinar will also be recorded, and we're going to have the recording and a recap on our blog probably from tomorrow. So quick recap on what we kind of spoke about today. Our main takeaways are sales for education. So we talked about listening, asking the right questions, showing how you can help, how you can solve the problems and what you're actually bringing to the table, and also deciding whether this customer is the right fit for you. Proactivity is key, so to show your value, to send out the daily reports, to let them know of the alerts, to let them know you're working on them, and to also let your customers feel that they don't have any issues thanks to you, and not that they don't need you. How to upsell at the right time and how to do it in the right way, and to never stop learning, to never stop visiting your customers, going around there, like looking how everything's going, if there's anything else you can do, how you can help them, and just keeping good communication there. So I had a blast. I mean, this has been super interesting and fun for me. I hope you all enjoyed too. And let's do some questions before we wrap up. Great. So I can see George here is asking that ultimately there has to be a quote, proposal, estimate of some kind. What do you actually offer them? Just a number? So Craig, Richard, love to hear how you would do the final offer.
Craig, you're probably best positioned to this, because I know what my answer would be. I don't write sales proposals. For all the reasons that Craig sort of talked about. People tend to use them to then go to the next IT provider and say, can we have it cheaper? But yeah, I used to literally write a figure on the back of a napkin or a cigarette packet or whatever back in the day. If they needed anything more than that, I would start to get a bit suspicious. How did you handle it, Craig?
Yeah, I mean, we're providing proposals to people regularly, and ultimately it's a little bit chicken and egg. You've got to get your services in such a position that you can offer a quick response to price, because most people will determine their moving forward with you on price. So what I do is I have a very clear structure. You pay for each location you're looking after, each server, each user, each Microsoft license. And so we can literally just run the numbers in a spreadsheet and come up with an answer almost instantaneously. What that then does is allow me to say, look, it's going to cost you about, $800 a month or £1,500 a month, whatever it is that okay? And the next time they see that price is when they're presented with contracts to sign that has the price in it, and a reference sheet which has got all of the numbers I use to calculate that as an appendix of that document. So effectively, once they've had the price and they've agreed to move forward, you're at the point where they see a contract with an agreed price, and then you just move on from there. That's how I do it.
Thanks. Yeah, so we can see there's two different approaches here. Richard, who does not agree to write any proposal. And I saw, Richard, you shared one of your blog posts about it. So that's a good read if anyone wants to take a look at that later. And Craig does send out proposals, and I'm sure that each one of you kind of needs to figure out. Oh, no, sorry.
I don't send out proposals. So the document that I send that's got that figure on is the contract. So it's not a proposal. So they just go straight from here's the number to the next piece of paper they see is the contract. I told you what the numbers were. Here's the contract. We're moving on. It's not a sales proposal. Let you make a decision. It's just boom. There you are. That's the contract. That's what we've agreed. Please sign it, and we'll move on.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Sorry. So let's jump straight into the next question. Roger, I saw you wanted to take a question from Devon.
Yeah, I mean, Devon's asked this question. As far as sales go, how do you handle their very first interaction? He says that he finds himself going door to door in areas to build his client base. Hopefully you haven't been doing that during the pandemic, but and he says, what's your recommendation for an elevator pitch I find that most people don't know what an MSP is. And Devrin says that he finds himself saying that I run an IT company. I mean, there's two very, very good points to be made here. I mean, MSP is jargon. Actually, I live in Scotland, and an MSP to me in Scotland is a member of the Scottish Parliament. I actually had to ask Richard Tubb what MSP meant in the context of an MSP that we're talking about today. What I find, and again, this is true of companies in all industries, is that we don't spend enough time working on what our offer is, and what, more importantly, articulating our offer. So a marketing jargon would describe that as a position, but basically what we're saying is, what is the problem that we solve, and who is it that we're solving that problem for? And that might sound like the bleeding obvious, but so many people don't articulate that correctly. But if you articulate your offer in a perfect, simple way, and you know who you're talking to, then you can build a website which includes answers to questions in the form of blogs, in the form of videos, in the form of content. And just look at Richard Tubb's website. You know, he's written hundreds of blogs, he's done hundreds of podcasts, because he knows who his customer is and he knows what problem he's solving. And over time, and unfortunately it can take time, you then start to build people who are looking for the answers to those questions and will actually start to ask you to help them. Now, if you've got a website that starts doing this, articulates the offer, answers the questions, you can boost that by using advertising. Could be Facebook, could be Google ads, whatever it might be, local news media if that's what you want to do, or global if necessary. But to my mind, the first thing to do, which a lot of companies don't do, is absolutely nail the offer so that they can articulate it to who they are serving.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. Richard's also got a question about something we discussed earlier. The multiple meetings with prospects and the initial health check, is that a billed service or is that a sunk cost? So Craig,
yeah,
what would you do?
We don't charge for that. So I again, going back to what I mentioned earlier about the fact that there's this blended period in the middle, I see the health check, again, as I mentioned before, as a two-way street. The first engagement, I'm listening and the client is saying to me, they've got this, they've got that, they have these other devices or whatever. The health check is effectively the get out of jail free card before you move on to the final proposal or final, pricing, on the basis that you are likely to find something after you've taken the client on board that could render a lot of the fees that you've put up front as not enough to cover the work. And so that health check, I see it as a sunk cost, to use Richard's parlance, because if you find out that there is something really bad at that point, then that's a real get out of jail free card. And so that's been really beneficial. You don't want to find that after the event. So yeah, I would not charge for that fee.
Yep, thank you, Craig. I can see a question here in the chat from Joseph. What kind of education or experience should an MSP salesperson have? That's really interesting because, Richard, as you mentioned, you didn't feel that you had any sales expertise when you started as an MSP. So what's your take here?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I would say to this is, for most of us who are on the line today on the webinar, we've got vast amounts of experience. We've got huge amounts of experience at fixing problems, making people's IT challenges go away. But that's not necessarily what a client is looking for. Often the client doesn't know what the problem is. And you remember those questions I asked? How is this affecting you? Things like that. I actually got into the situation of pushing down my knowledge, not letting everybody in the room know that I was the smartest person there, even though my ego wanted me to do that and to demonstrate I was the hero who could make it all go away. I actually asked what I would call dummy questions. So I'd say, how is that affecting you? Oh, why do you think that's happening? And stuff like this. Now, this is going to be really difficult for us to do, but people tend to open up more when they're having a conversation with an equal, somebody on their level. So I don't know if that answers a little bit of the question there, but rather than jumping in and trying to be the hero, I would ask questions. How is this affecting you? What have you tried to do to fix that? What do you think the problem might be? And so on and so forth. I don't know if that makes sense, Yasmin, and answers the question there, but resist the urge to just jump in and be the hero.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. And Devon also agrees with you there. And Devon, you also mentioned that you do bill on a health check unless a contract is agreed upon. So that's where you're paid for the time that you took, should they decide to go with someone else. So that's also a good point. I think that's all. I mean, we've covered so much here, and we had some great questions and some great answers from you all, Craig, Roger, and Richard. I know there's still some questions that were left unanswered, and I'd love if you could all post these on our Facebook community and share a bit of your experience. We'd love to see that. And I just want to thank everyone for joining, all the listeners, Richard, Roger, Craig, thank you again. It was lovely seeing you and having you on this live webinar today. I hope you enjoyed it.
Definitely.
And
it was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roger. We will have the recap on our website tomorrow, and we'll also send it out to everyone that was listening here today. And yeah, thank you, everyone. I enjoyed it so much. It was great seeing you, great seeing some familiar names in the chat today, and hope to see you all again very, very soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.